There exists a form of silence so unnerving, so potent, that it doesn't merely make her wonder, makes her spiral. Not out of confusion, but out of hunger. A hunger that grows louder in the absence of noise. You didn't disappear to punish, you vanished to preserve. And that kind of disappearance, the kind rooted in composure instead of chaos, doesn't leave a gap, it leaves a gravity. This isn't about ghosting, it's not about playing hard to get. This is about becoming untraceable, not by hiding, but by standing still in a world addicted to noise. Today, we enter the realm of a man whose restraint rewires her emotions. A man whose silence burns brighter than 1,000 texts ever could. This is about how stillness becomes obsession and why the man who holds his tongue becomes the one she can't stop thinking about. Let's begin. There comes a shift, a quiet rebellion inside you where you stop narrating your actions. Stop breaking yourself down into bite-sized clarity, just so she can feel safe. You don't offer disclaimers. You don't soften truth with excess words. You simply allow reality to exist without negotiation. And in that stillness, she starts to panic. Because now she's left with the silence of your confidence. And confidence, without explanation, feels dangerous to someone who's used to emotional power. Every time you explained, every time you clarified what you meant, you were subconsciously saying, your perception of me matters more than my peace. But now, you let the silence do the heavy lifting. No counterarguments, no long texts, no gentle reframes, just space. A vacuum she wasn't ready for. And in that vacuum, her mind fills the silence with her own spiraling, wondering what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and whether you're done. You didn't cut her off. You simply stopped making her emotional comfort your responsibility. That's not cold. That's clarity. And clarity, when it doesn't bend, becomes a kind of enigma she can't solve. When she steps back, expecting you to step forward, and you don't, that's when the imbalance begins. You're still unmoved, not because you don't feel, but because you refuse to be dictated by volatility. You respond not with reactivity, but with restraint. And that restraint, that calm withholding, it becomes its own kind of thunder. A thunder she feels in her nervous system when you don't flinch. The average man interprets her pulling away as a call to arms, a plea for reassurance. But you interpret it as space. And space is where your power lives. You don't chase her mood. You don't swim in her uncertainty. You let her retreat, and you stay still. That stillness isn't indifference, it's authority. It says, I know my value, and I will not disrupt my peace, just to prove it to you. She doesn't know what to do with that. She's used to urgency. You gave her serenity. She expected pursuit. You gave her presence. And that kind of presence, unhurried, solid, it triggers something ancient in her. The need to understand a man who doesn't make himself easily understood. That is the birth of obsession. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight for closure. You didn't even ask for fairness. You simply withdrew with the weight of a man who knows he deserves more. And in that withdrawal, you didn't disappear. You became more visible than ever. Because your absence wasn't light, it was thick, it had structure, it had shape. It left an imprint in the room like perfume on a pillow. She could feel the outline of you in every space you used to occupy. This wasn't vengeance. This was self-honor. You didn't step back to create doubt. You stepped back to restore clarity. You didn't want to be heard, you wanted to be at peace. When a man stops reacting to disrespect and starts responding with distance, he becomes unforgettable because she can't decode that silence. She can't fight it. She can't manipulate it. And that lack of control doesn't just confuse her. The most magnetic men are the ones you can't pin down. And now she's reading your silence like a novel with no ending, one where she's left on the final page with no resolution, no goodbye, no we need to talk, just white space. And that white space is louder than any conversation you could have had. She doesn't know if you're done. She doesn't know if you're moved on. She doesn't know if you ever cared at all, and that ambiguity, that's psychological gravity. The mystery isn't in what you said, it's in what you didn't. And she's not used to that. She's used to men revealing everything, oversharing, over-apologizing, overextending. But you offer nothing, and in that nothing, she sees strength. Now her mind is filled with ghost echoes of what you might be thinking, how you might be feeling, and what you're doing. She's haunted, not by your presence, but by your refusal to explain your absence. And that's where the shift happens. She realizes you're not just silent, you're sovereign. When you were around, you were taken for granted. Your texts were answered late. Your presence was expected. But now that you've vanished from her radar, she feels it like a shadow stretching across her day. She checks her phone not because she expects a message, but because she feels the absence of one. She replays old conversations, not because they were dramatic, but because they were anchored, solid, grounded, something she can't recreate with anyone else. You didn't walk away to teach her a lesson. You walked away because your values made it non-negotiable to stay where respect was absent. That's what separates you from 99% of men. You don't abandon out of spite. You release out of self-reverence. And now she's left chasing a ghost. Not a ghost of a man who ran, but of a man who stood so still, he became a mirror. And she didn't like what she saw in that mirror.